So today we're going to be talking about writing diversity. Now, most of you probably know what I mean when I say writing diversity, but just in case any of you are unsure or anyone on the video is unsure, when I say writing diversity, I don't just mean different personalities. I do mean different personalities because you don't want all your characters to just be one stereotype and all have the same type of voice and interests. That's a problem. But when I say writing diversity today, more what I'm talking about is people of different genders than you. So if you're a male writer, then females. If you're a female, then male writer, then male main character, different things like that. And also writing people of different ethnicities, different races, and different sexualities. And even of different genders, because within the last couple of years, it's been more and more widely accepted and talked about that there is more than just male and female accepted genders. Now, irregardless of what you think political-wise, I'm just going to be talking about this from a writing standpoint. So if you're for things like that or against things like that, that's on you. I'm not here to force my opinion on you. I'm just telling you that if you want to write someone of a different gender, sexuality, or race than you, here are some, or ethnicity, I should specify too, here are some tips and tricks that you can use. And this counts for fantasy too. When you're going for fantasy, you're going to be creating, if you're doing a really intense world build, you're going to be creating your own races, your own ethnicities, your own sexualities, your own genders, your own gender roles. These are all things you're going to have to consider in your world building and are going to have an effect on your world. Even if you're just doing your classic dwarves, what do dwarves look like in your world? Maybe they look drastically different than Tolkien's dwarves. Maybe they look a little bit more like aliens. Maybe your elves have different vibrant colors of skin and they're more green-skinned or something. I don't know. But the point being that if you're doing really complex world building, this is going to come into play anyway. So even on a non-political, political stance, this is going to be an important thing to talk about. So, with that intro being said, also for those watching the YouTube video, there's going to be a summer writing contest. Now, if you're going to enter into the summer writing contest, make sure you come by the library and grab one of these. Okay? It's due on July 20th before 8:45 p.m. It will not be accepted late. If you show up at 8:50, it will not be accepted. So please just try to get there before 8 because 8:45 is the deadline. All right, moving right along into our actual topic again. All right, so first thing I want to talk about is, obviously, unfortunately, because politics does tend to be involved if you're talking about reality and not your own fantasy world. And even in fantasy, a lot of times people will draw from our own political climate to talk about these types of issues using fantasy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fear. And I'm sorry, there's a glare on the screen, so I might want to write it a little lower. But we're going to talk about fear because some of you guys might be afraid of writing diversity in your books because of the fact that you are worried about doing it wrong, which I totally understand. A lot of people who do it wrong tend to get pretty bad flack for it, especially if they're not of that sexuality, gender, or race or ethnicity themselves. Which is part of the reason a lot of people default to fantasy, because then they're like, you can't get on me for being racist about an elf, it's not a real race, which is why a lot of people default to that. Or like Star Wars, you can't call me racist for being racist against aliens. So it's like, it's technically not a real race. We're being racist against antenna people, and it's like that. No people in real life have antennas. So it's like there are certain benefits to being a science fiction or fantasy author and deciding to do that instead, because you don't have as much of this fear. But sometimes if you're going to do realistic fiction, historical fiction, or heck, if you're even going to do just diversity in a fantasy novel that is regular diversity, for example, Harry Potter or things like that, you're going to want to take this into account. You might have a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of fear, a little worry, which is understandable. I honestly have been a little bit afraid of it myself purely because of the fact that I'm worried about stepping on people's toes. So that's why we're talking about this today, though, is to help assuage those fears and help you learn ways to better write these diversities in ways that are going to help them feel good about it and help you feel good about it. Because ultimately, having diversity is really important for your story. If you don't have diversity, you aren't properly writing your story because of the fact that we do have a very diverse culture. However, that being said, don't just purposely put diversity in there because you feel you have to. Do it because you feel the story needs it, not because you have to. There's a difference. All right. So with this fear, one thing that you can do to assuage this fear is not only learn as much as you can about this different diversity, but this different diverse group. I'll just say diverse group because I keep listing off all four. I'm just going to say diverse group. You can do whatever you can to learn about the diverse group, learn about their opinions, learn about what they prefer, learn about their culture, because yes, there is a different culture even if you're a different sexuality than normal or a different gender than normal, not just with race and ethnicity. And even with race and ethnicity, we're going to talk about that more later, there's a difference between the two that's going to actually affect how you write things. All right, but the biggest thing you can do to assuage this fear and to fix this is not only do your research, but get a sensitivity reader/editor. Now, this is more for if you're publishing. If you're not publishing, then it'll be just fine. You'll probably be okay. But if you're gonna get your novel published and you have some sort of diverse character that is a main or side character, especially if they're a main character, and mostly especially if they're a side character, it depends on how much of a side character they are. If they're super background, you're probably okay. But if they're like the main character's best friend, you're probably still going to want a sensitivity reader slash editor. I would recommend editor just because they might be a little bit more thorough, but you can also just do a sensitivity reader. With a sensitivity reader, we're going to talk about what is a sensitivity reader. A sensitivity reader is someone of that race, ethnicity, gender, or sexual identity that is able to read your book and help you know, hey, this is a stereotype, you might want to avoid that, or hey, I didn't really like this description here, it was actually kind of rude. And you might not even be aware of these things. Honestly, there's lots of things that I wasn't aware of when I first started doing this. I have several friends of various genders, sexualities, races, and ethnicities, and honestly, it was kind of eye-opening when I started trying to write characters that were similar to my friends and having them say, "Oh, you might not want to do that, that's a stereotype." And I had no idea. I wasn't trying to be rude. I love them. They're my best friends. But it's important to realize that you might have blind spots that have been created by media and even your own research that people who are actually of that diverse spectrum might be able to help you understand better. So, and with a sensitivity reader slash editor, you are probably going to have to pay for them to do that. However, on the bright side, if you pay for them to do that, then you avoid the risk of having anyone generally offended. There will, of course, be people who don't like your work because that's how writing works, unfortunately. Some people hate Harry Potter, some people hate Lord of the Rings, yet they're still famous. Who cares? So, as a result, some people will like your work, some people won't. Some people will agree with you as an author, some people won't. For example, a lot of people still love Harry Potter, but a lot of people don't agree with the author's political opinions. That's okay. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're just talking about someone read over your stuff to help you dissolve that fear and that worry you might have of writing them in an unflattering light. All right, the next point that we're going to talk about is skin colors, because that is an important part of diverse characters. So, some do's and don'ts with skin colors. And I actually didn't know these before, so it's actually really good that you look into this. And I hadn't even thought of it, but I totally agree with them once I read this. I always like to do research as well as my own, and I did find this on many websites agreed with this. Don't compare skin colors to foods. Now, it might seem like a good idea, but honestly, a lot of that is starting to go out of vogue because of the fact that it can seem kind of rude. For example, If I was to call you, if I was to call your skin milky white, that kind of sounds a little weird. Or a little strange. So, and it's the same thing with African American, Latinx, and etc. If you describe their skin as coffee colored or things like that, it can come off as rude because it comes off as kind of, I'm going to use the word fetishizing, which is basically sexualizing them. Because food is something you eat, and so as a result it comes off sexualizing, whether you mean it or not, which I actually found fascinating. So you can decide to agree with this or disagree with this, but this is just something I noticed when I was online. A lot of people of different ethnicities and races said that they preferred to have their skin colors described, and this is what you should do, using more regular colors, or if you're going to use unique colors, you can use things that are more earth-based because it feels more natural. Zach, could you open the door real quick? So things like, for example, mahogany would be okay because that's a type of wood. Or if you're going to use, or like mossy, or like the earth, or different things like that. So it helps it feel a little bit less, it helps to describe skin colors in a way that isn't food-based because it helps them feel less sexualized and helps them feel better about how they're being portrayed in your novel. As a result of that, like I said, focus on colors like gems or earth or different things like that. And that is just a preference. And I'll be honest, I would prefer that too. If someone said I had alabaster skin, I would definitely prefer that to being called milky or something like that. Like it just, I have to agree, it sounds weird. Or if someone was to describe me as vanilla frosting skin, that would be very weird to me now that I think about it. But you don't think about those kinds of things because of the fact that the default tends to be Caucasian. And that's perfectly acceptable. It's just part of society, unfortunately. Sure, we wish it wasn't part of society and we had more diversity, but that's why we're talking about it today. So if your default is Caucasian, just realize you should describe them just as much as you describe other people, because of the fact that people who are reading will automatically assume that they are the same race as them. That's what tends to happen. And as a result of that, you should not default to Caucasian, even though it's a thing that does happen, and if you've done it, don't feel guilty, but make sure that you clarify skin color and that you try to use things that are less food-based. All right, so next one. All right, we're going to talk about the difference between race and ethnicity. And we're going to talk about some other things, but we're going to start with race versus ethnicity. Now, I may not explain this fully correctly, but I'm going to do my best. So, with race versus ethnicity. So, an example of this, for example, wow, I'm redundant today. I did not get enough sleep. It would be, since we're all presumably Caucasian in this room, we all look Caucasian. Correct me if I'm wrong, but with Caucasian, you guys all might have very different backgrounds, but you're all considered Caucasian, right? So for example, my ancestry is Scottish, Irish, and Viking.
I'm like 80% German.
Whereas you're 80% German, exactly. Australia, see, there you go. Those are very different places, right? We all have 3 very different places here. So as a result, but we're all considered Caucasian, right? So that's what race versus ethnicity is. Technically, your ethnicity is primarily German, and your ethnicity is primarily Australian. And my ethnicity is primarily probably, I don't want to say it wrong, I think Norwegian. As far as my Viking ancestors goes, I would have to look exactly where they came from because obviously the world is marked up differently now. But I think I'm primarily Norwegian. Those are very different ethnicities. So ethnicity is where you come from, not your race. Angela, can you grab the door for them? Sorry. It's just to help make sure because I'm so loud that I don't disrupt the rest of the library. All right, come on in, come on in. I'm gonna close the door. Perfect. So, with race versus ethnicity, Your race might be Caucasian, but your ethnicity is going to be different. And that's the same thing with any other race versus ethnicity. I know lots and lots of people who get called African American, but technically they're Cuban American or they're Jamaican American because of the fact that they all have a more dark complexion, and so people just assume that they're African. That's not correct. And that's what you need to realize when writing diversity, is you need to know their ethnicity as well as their race. And if they're African American, that's fine. African American is popular for a reason, because Africa's a big country. It's huge, it takes up a large space, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have characters of a darker complexion who are Cuban, or Brazilian, or Venezuelan, or any other country. So if you're open to that idea with diversity, just keep in mind that race and ethnicity are going to be two very different things. So you're not going to want to assume that just because this person has a darker skin color or because this person is Latin, that they come from a certain place. Just like with Latinx people. Most people who are of Latin descent come from Mexico, but that's because Mexico's the largest part, right? That doesn't mean they can't come from Venezuela or Brazil or any other part of South America.
Brazil's also gigantic.
Exactly, Brazil's also gigantic, and yet do we hear a lot of Brazilians? Not really. And so it's kind of crazy to think about that we have these generalizations of where people come from based on race. So when writing diversity, just make sure that if you're doing it from a certain place, make sure you know the ethnicity as well as the race, because it's important. All right. Now, in this same category, we're going to talk about, and again, this is not trying to bother anyone. I know this is a hot political topic. That's why I feel we need to talk about it. It's important to talk about things that are not comfy. Because as writers, we are going to write things that are not comfy, not all the time, to everyone. And that is okay. That is perfectly okay. Also, this is no spaces at all, but that's supposed to be gender versus sexuality, in case you can't read that at all on the camera. So, again, I'm not trying to push any buttons. If you're for or against this, whatever you believe, that's fine. We're just talking about this from an analytical, logical standpoint, from a standpoint of how, if you want to write about this, how can you best write about this when you don't understand that culture and that diverse perspective yourself. That is all we're talking about, is trying to emotionally and logically understand this, irregardless of how you feel about it politically. Okay? We all feeling okay? Great. Okay. I'm like, I'm not here to offend anyone, but this is important to talk about because we live in a society where these are important topics.
I'm joking, but I'm totally here to offend people.
See, there you go. Like, it's important. It's important finding your group. All right, so gender versus sexuality. This is kind of the same thing. Gender is not your sexuality. Sexuality is what you're attracted to. So, obviously, as most of you probably know, there's gay, there's lesbian, there's bisexual, where you like both males and females. Then there's pansexual, where you include transgenders and sometimes other genders. It depends on how you feel about pansexuality, just because there are different people who define it different ways. So I'm not going to put an official label on it. But the point being that your sexuality is who you're attracted to. Your gender is who you identify as. Now, there are many, many, many different labels that go with this. But I'm just going to leave that up to your research. If you want to do a gender fluid character, if you want to do a transgender character, if you want to do a cisgender male who's friends with a transgender character, you got to make sure that you do, and when I say cisgender, that just means a male who identifies as being a male. So, just to clarify, because I realize not a lot of you guys know these terms, and that's okay. But gender versus sexuality is important to differentiate, because a lot of people have started to lump them together, kind of like race and ethnicity, and they are definitely different things, and that is okay. Again, I'm not trying to offend anyone. If you don't want to write a transgender character, that's okay. You don't have to. But if you do, just make sure that you do your research, and make sure that you have a sensitivity reader / editor, so that way they can tell you if there's any stereotypes you're accidentally falling into. As I said before, I would recommend a professional, but if you have friends who are of this, absolutely take advantage of it. If you have a friend who's gay and you're writing about a character who's gay and it's like the main love interest of this person, and then they find out they're gay and they're like, oh, this isn't gonna work out because they're not attracted to me or whatever, that is perfectly okay. But I would recommend finding people who, I would recommend finding a professional, but I would also recommend finding people who identify as gay, and identify as transgender or whatever you're writing about, and have them read over it to help give you a different perspective. Like I mentioned before, I have lots of friends who are of different sexualities and genders and races and ethnicities, and I always have them look over my work if I'm writing any sort of part of their diversity to make sure that I don't accidentally step on toes, because obviously I don't fully understand it. I've never been through that, right? So I don't get it, and that's okay. It's okay to not get it. I'm not here to shame you, I'm not here to ridicule you, I'm just here to talk about what people prefer and what has been proven that people like and don't like. Not necessarily that you're doing it wrong or doing it right. Just talking about how to help you improve here. All right. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about, one second, I gotta scroll down on my screen. Doop, doop, doop. All right. Ooh, this is a very good one. Forgot I had some of these. Planned this lesson a while ago. Okay, you want to avoid what's called the savior narrative. Now this goes both directions. It's more annoying the first way, but it's still annoying the second way, if that makes sense. So, the savior narrative is defined as when you have someone of a different sexuality, gender, race, or ethnicity, who is then the damsel in distress character for the heteronormative, cisgender, white person to come rescue. So in other words, the stereotypically main character that has been that way for years before we started writing more diversely comes in to rescue the person of diverse background. Ooh. Yeah, you can see where the problems occur here. Because then you're automatically assuming that they are less than adequate. That's not nice. However, it's not nice the other way either. It's not nice to have someone who is of a diverse character being the perfect Mary Stu / Marty Stu character person who looks down on all the cisgender white heteronormative people. That's also rude. It goes both ways. You don't want to have the person in diversity have all the power and be perfect, but you also don't want to have them be the damsel in distress who needs saving. Make them a human. That's all I'm basically saying here.
They are.
Exactly. They are a human, so make them human. They are not perfect. They are not completely flawed. Make them a human person. They will have their benefits. They will have their flaws. Maybe they are really good at military stuff, but they suck at romance. And so they're like, hey, I could kill a guy in 5 ways, but when it comes to asking this girl out on a date, nah, man. And you could do that. Have an African-American character who is in the military, who's super great, super amazing, but then he is struggling with this particular aspect of being a person. You don't want to have him be perfect and be like, oh yes, I know exactly how to flirt and I know how to kill a guy in 5 ways. That gets annoying.
Like in the way of things, how Dalinar is so good at killing people, but then he doesn't know how to run politics.
Exactly, but then he doesn't know how to run politics or different things like that. So there's all sorts of different aspects that you can make them unique and make them interesting. And like I said, don't make them perfect, but don't make them too flawed either. So you gotta hit this fine balance when it comes to this to avoid the savior narrative. Basically, in order to avoid the savior narrative, don't write Marty Stews or Mary Sues, like we've talked about in the past. Those perfect people, those characters bug us, irregardless of race, gender, sexuality, etc. It's annoying.
Humans be humans.
Exactly.
Make them humans.
Yes.
Even if they're elf, make them humans.
Goals. Exactly. So it's important, and that's like I talked about in the beginning, even though you weren't here, exactly, if they're even an elf or a fairy or a different alien race, make them relatable, make them human, because they will be flawed just like everyone else.
And that's like the point
That's
where
true.
they seem perfect.
Where they seem perfect, but then secretly.
Yeah, but then like still make them flawed because
Yes.
no one is perfect.
No one is perfect ever. No,
I
not even cute
understand
fluffy
you.
bunnies and animals. Cute fluffy bunnies and animals aren't perfect either.
They eat your lettuce.
Bunny scream.
Yes,
Holy
or like screaming goats, or like I saw this thing on Instagram the other day that made me really sad. But this kitten was like, "I'm gonna be super smart," and then freaking tried to jump over something, and its leg got stuck, and it's hanging there. And it's like, ah! So yeah, even animals make mistakes. Like you might think, oh well, it's not human, therefore it's less likely to make mistakes. No, if it's living, it's going to make mistakes.
Almost like a perfect species, and that like that.
Again, physically impossible. Until proven otherwise, until we see aliens that are perfect, or fantasy race that is perfect in real life, I refuse to believe that perfection
trees
exists.
don't make mistakes.
Seem perfect, but then don't have you witness that they're
And
not.
what
And
about
so like,
robots?
what?
What about robots?
Robots are the exception because they do not actually live. Controversial opinion. I know. Some people do believe that they live. For example, I'm playing a video game right now. It's very dark, so maybe don't play it. But it's called Detroit, something like that, Becoming Alive. But the whole becoming human or something like that. And the whole idea is that these androids have become semi-sentient and feel like they're alive. And so there are problems that occur with that.
No,
Because
just parkour, yeah.
So, as a result of that, I'm like, controversial opinion, robots can be perfect, but even then, I would say that's what makes Detroit Become Human, the video game, so good, is because of the fact that they are imperfect, too. They have their imperfections, they have their glitches, right? And so, I would personally say, if you're going to make a perfect character, I would say robot is the closest thing you got. But otherwise, if they are a living, sentient being, treat them as such. They're going to make mistakes. We all have judgment errors.
What if you make up a whole like god system?
Even, I would say,
Then have them get too cocky.
I was going to say, or if, I would say have them be more like Greek or Norwegian gods if you're going to have them be more main characters. Because of the fact that, obviously, if you believe in God, again, not trying to step on toes, if you believe in God and if you believe in Christianity, you might believe that God is perfect and that God knows everything that he's doing, right? But if you're writing a story where God's the main character, you probably don't want to do that because it's a very controversial opinion.
Well, I mean, like, right now I'm reading
Mhm.
Way of Kings. I'm just
Yes.
gonna keep mentioning it, but
You're all good.
they just keep mentioning like the Almighty and like
And I will come
and
back to
everything
you, Laura.
like that, and
Yeah.
so it's just such a big part of their culture.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then I think later in the series you actually like start meeting the Almighty, but something like that. But
Yeah.
they
If-
always talk about how perfect he is.
Yeah, so part of that too might be the fact that since you haven't read that part yet, I don't know. But
I have read it. I just
You
forgot
have
it.
Okay. Because I was like, if they start meeting the Almighty, they probably start noticing things that they might even perceive as flaws. Because there are some people who, think that God is perfect and then something terrible happens to them and then they're like, how can God be perfect because this terrible thing happened?
He's mad.
And so as a result of that, and I totally get that. I get that. I do. I've been through a lot in my life. I understand why some people are like life sucks, really? Again, not trying to step on toes, but I can understand both perspectives where some people are like debatable, whereas other people are like perfect. So I think it also just depends on as a culture, and that's more of a world building thing, less of a diversity thing and more of a world building thing. With that, I would say, with the savior narrative, this is an exemption of the savior narrative if you have a god physically, because of the fact that they might seem perfect or be perfect, but they have a reason for it. They are a deity, right? So there's an exemption there if they are an actual deity. The savior narrative becomes a problem when they aren't any sort of deity. They are a normal person who everyone's acting like is perfect. Does that make more sense? Okay.
But was there actually court of murders that like
That would be scary. Yes, Elliot.
so I think with like the savior narrative,
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons why it's so makes everybody so
Obnoxious,
angry is
yeah.
because they just really, a lot of people go into books
Mhm.
to get out of their own world,
Yes.
but they also go in there partially because they want to see themselves in that different world.
Absolutely.
And when the main character is this perfect being,
You can't see yourself in them.
yeah.
Absolutely. Very wisely stated. Thank you, Eliora. That was perfect.
So I saw something really cool of where,
Mhm.
so you know how like Black Panther?
Yes, absolutely. That's
yeah,
an
yeah.
excellent definition of not only race, ethnicity, pretty much everything we're talking about,
Yeah.
minus sexuality and gender.
But here's an interesting thing. So in the
Mhm.
scene of where, like, so most of the characters are women in the
Yeah.
in the movie.
That is true.
But so in the finale, like you know when they like
Yeah.
they all get captured,
Mhm.
and then what are they called, the gorilla people?
Yeah.
Will come in and save them.
Mhm.
And they kind of realized when they started filming that they're like, okay, so we have all the women
Mhm.
get captured, then we have this big buff guy come in and save them. They're like,
Right.
that's not what we want.
They're like,
So they
no,
had
this is damsel in distress.
So
Right.
they had this idea of they're like, what if like the first what are they gonna want, the Chitari? No.
Yeah.
Like
I know what you're talking
not the
But
like the gorilla people, the first
Yeah.
person you see is a
Mhm.
female.
Yeah.
You know, and she literally comes in with this big hammer and goes whacking people.
Exactly.
Like, if
So
you
it's,
actually look back, you
Yes.
would be like, oh.
I love that. I
And
love that.
Rapunzel.
Very astute
Rapunzel
point.
with her frying pan.
Yes, and Rapunzel with her
Yes.
frying pan. See, this is where it's like gender and sexualities of showing different perspectives and showing different perspectives on race and ethnicity. And even then, it talks about gender roles too. Gender is very much a part of gender roles as well, right? Like, for example, in Viking times, women were just as much shield maidens as they did help cook and clean. They could kick butt too, like you were just saying about the
Yeah,
Black
go
Panther.
Vikings.
Whereas in other European cultures, it was you stay home, you cook and clean, while I go fight things for the male. So it's also a cultural thing too. Honestly, being different is going to change how your culture works. And so if you are world building a fantasy universe or even a semi-fantasy universe like Black Panther, you're going to want to take into account these gender roles and these sexualities and these races and ethnicities. Because irregardless of if it's in a totally fantasy realm, like for example Lord of the Rings, you're still going to run into stuff like that. And it's going to change how things are perceived. Yes?
This book, I'm obsessed with it.
You're okay. It's good
women-
to love a good book.
The women all know how to read, but it's scandalous for a man to learn to read.
Yes,
then the
so we
women-
reversed that gender role. Yes,
Yeah,
I
so
thought
then
that was
the women are
fascinating.
important for
Mhm.
like reading, and like if the men want to read a book, they have to
Mhm.
have someone read to them, and then the men all go to battle and they
Mhm.
do that as their role. So they are about equal.
Yeah, so it's honestly fascinating to see how different things can be put together in different cultures. And I mean, even with like I'm reading a book currently for my job as an editor. I'm proofreading technically, but she did a fabulous job with this, and no spoilers, but honestly her books are pretty amazing. But because of the fact that I'm under contract not to talk about it, I will just say there are two different fantasy races, and one has enslaved the other. And that causes a very unique dynamic, right? So yes, it's going to be different, but it's also going to change how the world works with these different gender roles and different races, and especially if you're doing different races with fantasy or science fiction, those are going to be different, and they're going to have different ways of learning, different ways of talking, all sorts of things. Oh, hey, if you want to just grab this, don't be distracted. All right, so. All right. And if you have any more questions at the end or think of something, I would love it. You guys have had great comments, and it makes me very excited. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is
Diction? Oh.
nope. We're just going to talk about. I'm just going to call it adding, but then I'm going to explain myself. So, adding diverse characters just to fill a need. This is a problem too. I understand we just talked about the fact that it's a good thing. Like, it's important to do this, but don't do it just to fill a need. If you are adding in diverse characters just to be like, oh, well, if I don't have my token African American person, then everyone's going to be mad at me. And so you add in a cardboard cutout African American person just to basically stand there. Not good. So that's a problem too. You got to make sure that if you're going to add these characters, that they earn their way onto the scene. Because like Eliara was pointing out, you want to see yourself in these characters. And if someone starts to see themselves in a character and then realize they're a very flat character and have no meaning other than to stand there and look pretty, that's gonna bother them. Yes.
Also, when you like see yourself in the character or you see flaws in the character,
Yes.
it's way easier to like sympathize with them and get like attached to them.
Yes, absolutely.
And that makes you want to keep reading the book instead of just putting it down after the first
Precisely.
chapter. There's this show called Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this episode, well, there's one episode. But
So many.
In this one episode about the Cybermen,
Mhm.
the Cybermen are like this robot race
Yeah.
that isn't supposed to feel anything, but it kind of breaks your heart in the episode where the one Cyberman, as they're getting rid of some humans, sheds a single tear, and it just makes you think, like, the fact that they have flaws in there,
Yes.
and then that person, so they come from humans. The human brain is added into a robot body.
Yeah.
But anyways, the fact that like a part of that human is still in there just makes it very relatable and
Yeah.
makes you get very attached to that character and you want to see them more.
Exactly. Yes. So it's important that you don't just add someone of a different sexuality, gender, race, or ethnicity just to fill a quota. And I know a lot of people are pushing for this and saying, hey, if you don't have this type of character, then you're this, or then you're that, or problems. Like Eliora was saying, it's more about having characters that are well-rounded and that make you feel emotionally attached to them. And so it's better to have a character that is added in for the right reasons rather than just added in to fill a need.
So people won't get mad at you.
Exactly. Don't do it, because then they're still going to get mad at you. So don't do it just to make people not mad at you, because then they're still going to be upset at you.
There's always going to be someone who's mad.
There's always going to be someone who's mad at you, so don't do it to people please. Don't people please with your book. Gosh darn it.
Don't please do the people, please yourself, because then it's good.
Exactly. And then not only that, but your book will never be for everyone. I'm sorry. It's just true. There are lots of books that I've read that I'm like, I know thousands of other people who love it, like The False Prince, or like you were talking about with The Way of Kings. And yet I've also run into people who absolutely hate those books. It's just going to happen. So write in a way that you love and add in characters of diverse backgrounds that you feel helps flesh out your story and make it a whole story with whole people, rather than just adding them in because you feel you have to. Don't please anyone else. If you feel you need these diversities, absolutely, add them, please. It'll make your story better. But don't feel like you have to. Don't feel like it's a requirement. Okay? Okay. All right. All right. So, all right, now we're going to talk about culture. So, with culture, make sure that their culture is a part of who they are. Don't just make them you, but Latino, or something like that. Like, that's not, it's uncomfy. Like, because you're not a part of that culture. You don't understand that culture. And that is going to be a part of how they are raised, whether they like it or not. You know, they might not like their culture at all. They might be like, I want to be an independent woman, and their culture teaches them, no, women sit and stitch clothes at home. I don't know. And so they might not even like it, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be part of their culture, right? There are things that I don't like about my culture. There are things that people don't like about their culture. You know, there are things that people aren't going to like about who they are or who they come from or where they come from, right? But there are also going to be things they love about it, right? And there's going to be things they love about other cultures. For example, I am not in any sort of way that I am aware of at all Asian. But I absolutely love Asian culture. I think it's the coolest thing, and their food is the best. So but that's become a part of what I love. But then there are other things where it's like, I don't know, my family, I absolutely love my family, but we are very loud people, if you haven't noticed. And so as a result, that's something that some people don't like, and that it bothers them. And so I kind of get shy about it sometimes, and I'm like, I try to be quieter because I realize how loud I am. And so that's the thing that it's kind of a love-hate relationship where I'm like, I love it, but at the same time I'm kind of like awkward about it because some people don't like it. And so that's something that's a part of me, though. I can't take that out of me. That's a part of me, whether I like it or not. And that's the same thing with culture. You got to make sure that you include the culture of the person in their personality. It is a part of their personality. But here's the catch. Don't make it their personality. Don't make it so the culture is the personality. Make culture a part of their personality. Just like me having blonde hair is just a part of who I am. It's not my whole identity.
You know, blonde hair, blue eyes stereotype. There will be a lot of people who I would just. What I am though.
No, I think it's more just because of the fact that like it's just a piece of who you are, right? You don't want people to judge you because of your blonde hair, blue eyes. You don't want people to judge you because of your brown eyes, right? These are all just things that you have, right? You have no control over them. And it's the same thing with culture. You don't control what culture you're born into, right? Most of us don't. If you know a secret, let me know. But most of us don't control that. And so as a result, you're going to be part of this culture and it's going to be a part of you. But that does not necessarily mean that you have to embody this whole culture and every single stereotype of this culture and do every single thing that this culture tells you to do. Part of having a culture be a part of yourself is that you are a whole person without that culture, but that you cannot be separated from it because it's a part of who you are. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, good. I wasn't sure really how to best describe it. And when I say culture, I don't just mean race or ethnicity. I also do mean sexuality and gender because that has become its kind of own culture, especially in today's day and age. So as a result of that, it's important that if you're writing, there no T's exist. It's important to emphasize that there is a different culture as a part of being part of those groups. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said not to compare skin colors to like foods.
Yes, that is correct.
So sometimes when somebody's blushing, somebody will say that they're like beet red.
Yes.
But beet is technically a type of food.
Right. So I would say that is okay so long as they are not an alien with red skin. That's where the problem comes in. Because blushing tomato red or beet red is absolutely a thing that a lot of people do. Absolutely. But the reason it becomes a problem with skin color is because you can't get rid of that skin color. A blush goes away. So as a result, it's not a defining trait. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tip that I heard from somebody
Yeah.
once is like a way to not insult someone is if they can't change it about themselves in 5 seconds.
Yes.
Don't comment on it.
Exactly. Or if you do comment on it in a very respectful way. Like you can't just not describe a character, right? You have to know what they look like. That's important. But like you said, if someone can't change that about themselves for more than 5 seconds, don't make it the only thing you comment on. Don't emphasize it. Make it subtle. Make sure it's subtle. Don't make it the only thing that you talk about. Absolutely. I completely agree. That is a great rule to live by. Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
In this book.
Yes.
Every time.
Book.
Every single time you meet a new character,
Mhm.
it always mentions the clothing, no matter what.
Yes.
And
That's
every
very much a
time
thing he does.
that it mentions a woman, it always
Mhm.
says sleek dress. It doesn't matter what color it is. Sleek dress. She rose with her sleek dress. She had a sleek dress on. Like, just.
No, it's fair. And see, that's where it comes to be bad, is because you need to make sure that you don't repeat yourself too much too. So if you have like a bunch of characters who are all African American, make sure that you don't describe all of them as having mahogany skin, his mahogany skin, her mahogany skin. It's like, okay, come up with a different word, please.
Yeah, I used to do that for a lot of my like magic
Mhm.
and just like things that happen.
Right, like I said, other magical races.
Because if I go Control F and type in grin, I'm going to find 100.
Oh no, it's true. There are certain words like that too where you just do it a lot and you don't even realize it. it was actually kind of funny because I will run into that all the time when I'm editing, where people will have a phrase that they use, and they use it like 70 times throughout the book, and they don't even realize it. They'll hand it to me and be like, yeah, it's almost completely done. And I'm like, dude, you need to delete like at least 50 of these. So, and that's okay. It happens to me. It happens to everyone. I honestly personally call it, you have invented your own author trope, because it will happen. Every author invents their own trope on accident. So the sleek dress trope, for example. You as an author are going to accidentally invent a trope. It is going to happen. Whether you want it to or not, you will be one day talked about where someone says, oh, they have this trope. It will happen. Don't be ashamed of it. It's part of being an author.
I'm like, well, you see, they have this trope where all of the characters are named Travis. I'm like, yep, that's me.
That's me. No, it's true. In Dungeons and Dragons with my cousins, I might have mentioned this before, but anytime there's an NPC character that we're not really going to interact with, we call him David. That's it.
David.
They're all David.
It's like David number 1, come over here.
David.
Hey
At
guys,
one
remember
point,
David? The gnome or the elf or the season?
Exactly.
The elf. David the elf. Okay, is he the blonde one or the that one? Blonde one. Well, it's like 50 blonde.
I think my favorite to this day is still David. How's David? So, yes, my cousins are quite comedic. But yeah, so these are all important things to talk about. Do you have any questions about other, because like I said, I have a lot of friends of different ethnicities, races, sexualities, genders. Do you guys have any questions about those? Don't be ashamed, throw them out. Like I said, today we're not bothering with political correctness today. We are just asking questions.
I mean, I said nothing.
Because in my opinion, this is about people being people and emotions and talking about how we address this. Not necessarily correct or anything like that. Do you have a question or no?
I'm
Thinking. Okay. I'll give you guys a minute to think. But yeah, I'll just write some of the options up on the board.
This doesn't have to do with anything except culture.
That is okay too. You can talk about culture, because that honestly fits in the ethnicity category.
Have you met anybody else who is obsessed with barefoot?
Pardon? You're gonna have to say that again.
I'm a little strange. I'm obsessed with going barefoot. Like I run.
Oh,
I
gotcha.
go
Same here.
track, and I went barefoot, and the whole crowd was just like, "You see that girl? She's barefoot." It's just everyone, when I say that I run barefoot, they're like, and they're clearly grossed out by it, and like. So
I'll
just-
be honest.
no,
That
barefoot
is very
for the win.
interesting. That is very unique.
What? Barefoot for the win. Like,
No,
if
it's
I
true.
could,
There are a lot
I
of
would go
people.
barefoot the entire time.
There are a lot of
I'm
people
so
who
much
like it.
faster when I'm barefoot. I'm so
Mhm.
slow with
Interesting.
shoes, they clunk me down.
That makes sense. No, it actually does.
Yeah,
Don't worry.
big and
It makes
clunky,
sense.
whereas with, like,
I get that. That honestly, that's why I get here so much slow in the winters, because these days they're lovely, but they are clunky. So I get it. So with that, I would say that's definitely, I would say it's kind of your own personal culture. We all have our own personal culture too, right? For example, I am not Asian at all, like I mentioned earlier, but I love Asian food. So as part of my kids growing up in the future, they will be eating some Asian foods, whether they like it or not. And that is part of my personal culture. So it's, and going barefoot is clearly part of your own personal culture. Your family's? That's cool. I love that. Honestly, I have a friend who all throughout childhood went barefoot and still to this day goes barefoot, despite the fact that she one time accidentally stepped on something really sharp in the grass and had to get stitches. And she still walks barefoot everywhere, so.
Well, I'm
like,
a
I get
two-story
that.
window, and I still like climbing trees and stuff. So
Yeah, see, there you go. So, like, honestly.
Climbing trees is the best thing ever. I have stayed on a tree for like hours, mainly because I'm a coward, but.
But yeah, so
Yes.
being barefoot though is absolutely part of culture too. For example, in Japan, it is rude to have your shoes on inside of a house. And as you know, in America, most of the time it depends on the person, right? Whereas in Japan, you are the worst if you still have your shoes on and you're in the house. So it's like, it's different with culture, from culture to culture and place to place. And even recently I learned that Japan is perfectly acceptable for kids as young as, I believe, 6 to go out grocery shopping on their own. because of the, yeah.
I've seen a
Yeah.
Netflix series
Mhm.
about that.
Because of the fact that they believe that in their own personal culture, they believe that children are the responsibility of everyone. As a result, they are all supposed to be treated with respect. Adults can attack other adults, but you are literally the worst person on this planet if you attack a child. And sure, we might believe that here, but we have not ingrained it in our culture like they have. As a result, honestly, kidnapping is almost extinct in Japan.
Good.
It's almost completely gone. Any kid can pretty much,
yeah.
like they said, just give them $20, let your 2 6-year-olds run around the town and then come back home. You can do that.
If we did that in our family, oh no.
Yeah, exactly. Around here, you would be like, my kid is gone, they are dead. Like, you panic. But it's a different culture there. So honestly, there are lots of different things that are different about different cultures, and that is perfectly fine. With culture, it's gonna be different no matter who you talk to. And like you said, there's also gonna be personal culture too, where you yourself have your own personal culture.
Travis.
Or your families might have your own personal culture too, where you're like, I talked to my husband a lot recently, and it's so funny because I will say to something like, what, that's a thing? And he's like, oh yeah, I thought all families did that. And I'm like, I thought all families didn't do that. And so there are some things that only your family does too, and that's perfectly acceptable, and that is important to include that, again, in diversity as well, because we are all different people. And it's important that we have those different things. For example, I would probably never run with my shoes off, but that's because I hate how my feet look. I think everyone else's feet look gorgeous, but I don't like mine.
Oh, same here. My
And
feet
so,
look
like,
ugly as frick, but if people are staring at my feet, it's their problem.
Exactly. But yeah, so it's like if you were to be barefoot, or if my cousin was to be barefoot, I'd be totally fine with it. But me personally, nothing. And so like it's different, and it's important to capitalize on those differences and talk about those differences too. So yes, I think that is very cool, honestly. Okay, anyone else have questions about gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, or culture?
I was just gonna say, with the kids running to the store, you're like, our kids are gone, they're dead. With us, we're like, Hiram's gone. What buildings have burned down? No sirens? No sirens.
We're okay. No one's in trouble.
No one's dead
We're
yet.
good. We're probably fine. Yeah, no.
Let's just call the cops to make sure that he doesn't kill anyone.
You're like, hey, have you seen my little brother running around? You know the one.
You know that one? Yeah. No, so there you go. So it's we're all unique, and that is honestly part of what I love about life, is the fact that we're all so different.
If you weren't, it would be so freaking
It'd be
boring.
so boring. That's why diversity is important.
I wouldn't be able to punch anyone, because then I wouldn't have an excuse. Like,
There would be no arguments.
Not necessarily.
Arguments
Honestly,
are
we would-
fun.
If we were the exact same, we would think the exact same.
Maybe.
that'd be.
I'm only gonna say maybe because I'll be honest. There have been times where I've run into people who think almost exactly the exact same, and I think that they're perfect for each other, and then all of a sudden they explode. So I'll be honest, even if we all like looked the same and semi-thought the same, I think that it's impossible for a human to all be exactly identical, and there would still be arguments. I think they'd just be less common. So I agree with you, less common, but not extinct. Purely
But
because
they
we're
might get
humans and
more
we have
heated.
problems. That's true. It could be peanut butter, jelly, peanut butter, jelly. What are we talking about? Toast. So that's fair. It could be very interesting.
You know, they like both put like sound like words, and they start dueling.
Yes, they're dueling each other over what you just put on your toast.
And then someone was like, my guy, cheese. And they're like,
They're like, now you all, we're all
No,
gonna.
yeah. They just like all start fighting.
and they're just like,
They're either
let's
all
get
like,
him.
yeah, they're either like, all you're genius, or we both have to kill this guy. He's just crazy.
And I was like, truce? Let's
So-
get him.
Oh yeah, like in that one video that ended.
Yes.
All right, so
That's amazing.
any other questions? I have about 6 minutes, give or take, before we turn off the video. So any more questions about
like and
these
subscribe.
topics. Yes, like and subscribe, please, to the American Folk Library YouTube channel so you can get more of this crazy content.
Yes.
Absolutely, please. Especially because the more likes and subscribes that I get, the more likely they're going to encourage this program, and so we get more monies to fund us. So
Yes.
please. All right.
And comment down below.
If you have any questions, comment down below.
Yeah,
If you have any things you're confused about, comment down below.
But
In
if you're a
general.
jerk, keep it to yourself.
And give me lots
Exactly.
of money. Yeah, give us $1 million fund.
Unfortunately, I cannot.
Yeah, maybe in the Denny's parking lot and we'll talk money.
All right, so
On Tuesday.
how are we feeling about these?
6 o'clock.
All right, I'm just going to start going down the list. Does anyone want to talk about different genders? Does anyone have questions on different genders? It can be anything from like, if you've heard a term at school that you're confused about, ask.
I've heard terms that I think I'd better not ask.
Oh, like, because if you're talking about like cisgender or transgender, those are perfectly acceptable to talk about. Like, just you can throw out things about gender that if you want to talk about it, or like gender fluidity, how that works, non-binary, how that works.
It's just weird to me, honestly. Like, I don't want to offend anyone.
No,
'cause
exactly.
Then
We're
y'all
not
come
trying to
after me,
offend
but
anyone, but it's just it's different to you because
All
you don't
this-
understand, which is
Yeah.
why it's important if you write anything like that in the future that you do your research and to talk to someone else because you don't get it, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, I will never understand what it's like to be non-binary. I've always been a girl and liked to be a girl, and that's okay. But that just means if I ever choose to write a character that feels that way, I will have to talk to someone else because I don't personally get it, and that's okay. Like you said, it's confusing for us if we don't understand it. It's kind of like race and ethnicity, right? Or like culture, like we were just talking about with Japan. We're all like, are they crazy? Letting their 6-year-olds go shopping? But no, they're not crazy. They just have a different culture than us.
yeah, and if
Wait,
everyone
wait,
respects
wait,
kids,
like-
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Then no one's
All
gonna
should go.
Exactly.
see a 6-year-old shop and they're like, "You're mine now."
Exactly. No one's going to do
Whereas
that because
that would
that's,
happen in
that's what they
America.
believe.
Happen with
Yes,
dogs, though.
exactly.
Does that happen to dogs?
I have
They
no
get
idea.
kidnapped.
I've never looked it up.
Wouldn't it be dog napped?
Dog napped.
Kidnap a dog.
All right. So it sounds like we're all a little bit uncomfortable about this topic. If you have more questions about this topic afterwards, feel free to ask, because I don't want you to feel ashamed for asking questions about gender or sexuality or any of these things, because with these types of things, I think it's important to talk about openly because of the fact that no one talks about it openly. And honestly, I have so many friends that fit these categories that I'm like, you can probably ask me, and if I don't know, I'll know someone to ask.
Yeah.
So, all right.
There was a
How
girl in my
about?
grade who had a crush on me for like a year.
Yeah, and so you're
I'm
like,
like,
whoa.
Sorry, buddy, I'm straight.
Yeah.
Except I didn't say it to her face, but
But,
she
like-
did ask like, "Hey, are you LGBTQ?" And I'm like, "Nope." And she's like, "Darn."
But hey, see, there you go.
Yeah, it was
But hey,
exciting.
I
She
actually think
comes
that's-
with a bouquet of flowers, and I'm like,
I actually think that's nice because she asked. She's being
Yeah.
respectful of the fact that you aren't.
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, "Are you sure?" She's like, "I get it. I respect it." You know, and that's important, honestly. Yes.
I guess I probably shouldn't ask this, but is there
Go
like
ahead.
any specific gender names that are like
Ooh, yeah.
insulting that we should not?
I think that is a great question. I don't know why you say you
Excellent
shouldn't
question.
ask this. This is a good question. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that, so I would say definitely do more research on that question because that is very important. I would just generally say the biggest insult is if they're a transgender person and they were originally a he and they have transitioned over to female and you still call them he, him pronouns. That is very rude, very offensive. Do not call them by their dead gender. That's what it's called, is dead gender when you transition. So that is the one thing I'm aware of. Do not call someone who's transgender their original gender. That is not okay. But aside from that, I would say do more research into that because aside from the transgender, I'm not familiar with that necessarily. But I definitely say use preferred gender pronouns. Whatever they want to be called, call them that. It's respectful.
Yeah.
And
so,
as a just rule of thumb, make sure you're not being like derogatory with like anything because that's me.
Right, but that's even rude just to normal people,
Yeah.
to who are even just normal people. What I mean is like people who like you and I are both Caucasian, so
Mhm.
being derogatory towards you would still be rude, even though we're both Caucasian. That's all I
Yeah.
mean. So like in a
Just
normal
don't be
conversation,
derogatory. Be
don't
kind
be
to
derogatory.
everyone.
Yes,
Well,
be
unless
kind
it's
to
my
everyone,
brother.
irregardless of if they're your same race, sexuality, gender,
I'm
etc.
sorry.
Be nice to everyone. All right.
I'm really mad.
Alright. Okay. Do we have any
That's
questions
me.
about talking about race?
I forgot my bag.
No questions?
I got a few books.
You had a few? Are you
yeah.
sure?
Well, for later.
Oh, for later? Okay. Okay, if you're sure. All right. How about ethnicity or culture? Since we have about 1 minute left. We're good? Okay. If you want to ask any personal questions, please feel free to leave a comment down below. And again, I would love to see what research you come up with and add a little bonus content onto this because I completely agree. I think that is a very worthy question. Do not be ashamed to ask questions like that. That is a good question.
That was a really
I
good
wasn't
one.
sure
So-
if, like, it would be appropriate for you to say those names.
No. Yeah, I'll be honest, I would say it in a way that is respectful, if that was the case. For example, you know, it's obviously with race, it's obviously not a thing to say the N-word, right? That's not a thing. But if you had asked me what derogatory terms were, I would have said this is a derogatory term. I'm not saying this derogatorily, but here are the terms. So, you're perfectly acceptable to ask me those kinds of questions. I would just clarify in advance. I'm not saying these derogatorily, I'm just telling you what they are so you can avoid them. And that's okay.
You're
So,
right.
like, what about, like, in that, like, what about, To Kill a Mockingbird? I know it
To Kill a
uses-
Mockingbird?
I know
Yes.
it uses
So with To Kill a Mockingbird, the reason it is acceptable in that novel is because of the fact that the people who are using it as a derogatory term. So as a result of that, if someone in your novel is being derogatory, like for example with the transgender thing, if someone is transgender and you want to showcase the fact that this person is not a nice person, and so you purposely have them use their dead pronoun, that would be a way to showcase that they're being rude or that they're not being okay. And
So
so
being asserting what I shouldn't say.
exactly, you're demonstrating what is being rude. And so that's why To Kill a Mockingbird it's okay because the people who call them the N-word are all terrible people, right? So as a result, you
I
know
that
who
was,
is
like, one of
terrible
the
and who's not.
author's
Yeah.
Reasons is she
Mhm.
wanted to distinguish who is good and
Yes.
who is bad, and that's how she did it.
So if you're distinguishing good from bad, absolutely you can do that. But if you're saying it and you're trying to be respectful, it's not respectful. So that's the difference there, I would say. Okay.
Yeah.
Last bout. Give you 10 seconds. No questions? Okay. And feel free to ask me questions afterwards. Again, I know lots of people of all these different types of backgrounds. So as a result, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it, or if I don't know anything, I can ask them. I'm pretty sure I know people from every single aspect of LGBTQ. And I know people from not quite every race and ethnicity, but a handful. And if I don't know them, they might know them. So I am more than happy to reach out to contacts and try and figure out the answer for you if need be. So, all right. Well, thank you all for coming and for the lesson. I would love to talk more after the lesson.
That'd be awesome.